Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 13 of In the Flow. We are your hosts, The Eureka Effect. My name is Courtney.
And my name is Hannah.
And today we're going to be talking all about shadow work.
Yes, so the process of reprogramming yourself. We would like to introduce the idea of shadow work to you guys today and further explain its meaning and process.
So if you are familiar with the term shadow work and don't really know how to utilize it in your day-to-day life, or you are just kind of looking for a better understanding of what it means or how to get started on your own, then definitely stay tuned.
Okay, so we're actually on this topic because of a question we got on TikTok. And this question was, when does the healing process kick in when you're doing shadow work? So this person kind of has done journal prompts, it seems like, and has sort of dabbled in the surface level of shadow work, but doesn't understand how to see it through to the end.
Yeah, because shadow work is more than just journal prompts. Mm-hmm. It's an entire healing process that starts with facing that shadow side of yourself, or the sides of yourself that you tend not to look at.
Yes, exactly. So the shadow self, that term actually comes from Carl Jung. If you want to Google more on his theory and sort of his, I guess theory is the only really word for it, his theory
philosophy on, whatever,
perfect, philosophy on the shadow self, I think that would really benefit you in all parts of your life, not just for shadow work, because the shadow self is essentially your ego, which, as we know, I think we've talked about our ego quite a bit. It's something that a lot of us wrestle with, but it's a tool and not something that we should be trying to shut up, basically.
Yes, or so the ego isn't something you should live out of nor avoid, and I think that the shadow part of your ego in particular, the side that that you really do push deep down, or that comes from very deep-rooted childhood experiences, they take the most work, and they oftentimes are the most hidden, and I think that's where, like, the shadow term, or the term shadow comes from, is because it's kind of the hidden facets of your personality that you tend to
shy away from, or try to hide from people, really. So that's the shadow part, and the work part is obviously the practical things that we've talked about: journal prompts, meditation, therapy. There's all sorts of different ways to go about shadow work, and we will get into that next.
Okay, so before you do the shadow work, you must first meet your shadow self. So how do you meet your shadow self exactly? You can start by asking yourself the right questions, paying attention to when you're getting triggered, what is triggering you and why.
Yes.
That is pretty much actively practicing mindfulness in the moment when you feel these negative emotions coming over you. That is normally a sign of something.
Your shadow self kind of coming to the surface, I would say, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then there is also guided meditations for healing your inner child, which kind of takes you back into certain places in time to
reprogram what your thoughts are around a certain event in your life. I would say traumatic event in your life. Traumatic event sounds very dramatic, but I would like to note that as children, out in our first 5 years of life, there's a lot of things that are going to be quote unquote traumatic, and it's our parents' jobs to sort of guide us through that and help us process the emotions that come around these traumatic events. Now, psychology is an ever evolving thing, and a lot of our parents did not have access to the information that we have today. So a lot of us in the millennial / maybe a little bit older generation have a lot of crazy triggers and shadow work to do over things that may seem mundane and normal, I think, in a regular setting.
Yes, yeah, because triggers are also generational as well.
Yes.
And I guess for those of you that aren't familiar, I guess, with the term trigger, we will try to break it down for you. It doesn't have to be something that is, like, extremely through the roof triggering. It's something that just annoys you, upsets you, or lowers your vibration, or like makes you feel negative and icky.
Yes.
And all of those sort of things are stemming from internalized experiences that you had when you were a child, essentially.
Yes. And not always when you were a child. I just want to point that out too. Like sometimes these traumas can happen during relationships. You know what I mean? In our older years, and I think that's important to note. Like it's
exactly. Just like you can program your brain at any age, to like you can reprogram your brain. Your brain is still being subconsciously programmed at any age. There is always learning and unlearning going on. But essentially, shadow work is getting to know your triggers, so your shadow self, and then doing the work
to actively, change those and address those behaviors. Back to the term trigger. A trigger doesn't have to be a full-on PTSD episode where you're literally lying on the floor and like sweating and whatever. It can be as simple as snapping at someone that you wouldn't normally snap at, or having a bad day when you know that there's a lot of good things coming and you normally wouldn't be feeling that way in that situation.
So essentially, a trigger doesn't have to be something that's catastrophic to you. It can just be something that is a reoccurring, upsetting, negative. There's no other way to say it than trigger, I guess. Like it's a heavy word, but you don't have to look at it like that. It's just something that repeatedly might put you or set you off, or put you into a bad mood, or make you anxious, make you
sad, upset,
ashamed, guilty, like these, something that is constantly bringing about
a negative emotion.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay, so now that we've sort of defined what a trigger is, how do we catch these things, and how do we make ourselves aware of these things as they come up?
So there are a couple different ways that you can practice mindfulness, meditation, or CBT therapy, which if you have the privilege of partaking in like a therapy group, or you have your own therapist, I would definitely ask about CBT, because CBT is all about emotional regulation and catching your triggers in action. And it is very it's the practical way, it's the on paper way to do shadow work.
Yes, exactly.
Essentially. And another really good way is so we mentioned the journal prompts, but after you become aware of your trigger, you then have to put the work into
counteract it, kind of
thing. And not let it trigger you anymore, because the first step is acknowledgement, and that's where a lot of people are dropping off with the shadow work. Is like, okay, so I know I have all these problems, now what do I do to fix them? So first you should try by minimizing the trigger itself. Is it something that you can do? Is it something that you can control? Or is there changes that you need to make in your exterior world?
To prevent them from happening again, for sure. I think another good way to identify your triggers is examining your family tree and family history, talking to your parents about maybe what they've gone through in their life and seeing the parallels, because generational curses are a real thing. Our parents ingrain in us their bad habits that they have not yet corrected through shadow work, and it's up to us to recognize those as well.
Exactly. And I think this generation, especially if you're listening to this podcast, I think that there is a big movement going on of essentially shadow work or inner healing, or like this is basically like the here and now. It is time to do it. And it really does start by examining how you were raised and what type of beliefs were projected on you, because all shadow work is essentially confronting these limiting beliefs and accepting them, letting them go, and then actively working to move on from them.
Yes, exactly. And then by doing that, you can be closer to your higher self and where you want to be.
So the best way to become acquainted with your shadow self, as we said, is to become aware of your triggers. So I I guess one way to practice that is to be mindful, like, throughout the day and kind of just analyze what is going on and how you're feeling.
Mood,
keeping a mood tracker maybe in a journal to kind of see how your moods
fluctuate.
Yes, there maybe isn't a specific question you have to ask yourself, but we do have a couple different examples of triggers or of working through this process, as well as some journal prompts to kind of like get you thinking, or ways to become aware of your shadow self.
Yes, and get you kind of started along on your journey. Okay, so a practical, I guess a real world example for me is a phone call I had to make a few days ago. So I am trying to get in contact with a psychiatrist. That's not a psychologist, a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
To sort of talk about my medication that I'm on right now and get a diagnosis for some other things that I'm dealing with. When I called, now I was already kind of worked up before I called. This was something that I was kind of anxious about doing in the first place. So when I called and I didn't really get the response I wanted, this was very triggering for me. I felt very upset. I'm sure that my voice probably changed on the phone, and I felt weak and like shaky and all the things that I kind of start to feel when I let myself get out of control. But in the moment, I kept myself composed. I thanked the secretary for whatever she could do. Obviously, this is a very difficult time for a lot of people with their mental health, and professionals in the field are stretched very thin. So I just sort of said my piece, like, if you can get in contact with me sooner, that's great. If not, I still have that date set, so it's not that big of a deal. Hung up. Bawled my eyes out for like far too long. But I was very upset because in my head, I was doing everything I could to get the help that I needed. And it was triggering to me when I did not receive that. And that made me feel out of control and started me on this whole thought process that I would normally default to in a lot of negative situations. Mm-hmm. So
well, what I essentially think is going on is that you feel as though you've done everything you can, and you are not getting the help that you needed. Therefore, you are not worthy of that help. There's a little voice inside of you trying to get this help that you need over and over and over again, and you keep being confronted with issue after issue after issue, which is making you feel the need to basically prove your case to these doctors. So whenever you are being what could be interpreted to you, you're being rejected, invalidated, or you aren't important enough, or you are like those are sort of the type of beliefs that will pop up in your head when you are faced with this sort of rejection. And I say that with quotes because that's how your ego will interpret it. I'm not getting what I want, therefore, and then fill in the blanks with whatever your particular trigger is.
Yes. So my way of sort of doing my shadow work on this one and making it through the other side of that emotion was letting myself feel angry. I put on an angry song and I listened to it for like about half of it, and then halfway through I told myself, okay, now think of all the reasons I should be grateful in this situation, because I know it's not the end of the world. I know that I've done what I can in this situation, and truly my reaction is bigger than what the situation actually is. So in this scenario, I'm very lucky to have access to someone for free. It is going to take me a little bit longer to see someone, but in the meantime, I also have a really awesome therapist that I should be grateful to, that I can see once bi-weekly or even weekly if I need those checkups. I right now am probably have the most mental clarity that I ever had. Just because I want a diagnosis does not mean I need a diagnosis to move forward and get better.
Because you acknowledge that is you acting out of your ego and acting out of program beliefs. Like you acknowledged before you let that emotional reaction run you, essentially. And the process that you have to go through is being okay with feeling that emotion and not running away from it, not trying to cope with drugs, alcohol, not trying to avoid it, suppress it. It is validated. Say, hey, it's okay that I'm angry. You don't need anyone else to even validate you. You know why you're angry, so you can accept why you're angry, and then you can move on by either you can listen to positive affirmations, you can either come up with things that you're grateful for. There's plenty of different ways that you can incorporate the work part of shadow work. It doesn't have to stop with, these are the negative emotions that I feel. It's, how am I going to actively try to avoid feeling these feelings that I feel typically, which
and if they come up, how do I keep them from spiraling out of control? Because it's okay to be halfway through your trigger and then realize that, and you can still turn it around. Just because you have acted out, like I said, I bawled my eyes out. That's maybe not a regular response to getting an appointment that I wanted anyway, but I worked through that, and now I know next time I probably will react a little differently.
Yes, you don't need to, it can start at any given point. Like, you can be in the middle of a spiral and then even start from there. But the earlier that you catch it, probably the better it's going to be, because, like, vibration-wise, the more that you start thinking these negative thoughts and ruminating and trying to figure out what you could have done better and analyzing and really feeding into that, you're really creating something more. And
it's the law of attraction, essentially. If you focus on the negative of it, you're going to receive negative back from it. Right?
So the key basically is once you're confronted with whatever emotion that's reoccurring in your life that you feel is holding you back, what alternative way can you deal with this emotion next time it arises?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so we just tried our very best to demonstrate what shadow work actually looks like. So that is kind of a really specific example, as all shadow work is, because it is on a very individual basis.
Yes.
But I do have some really good questions to really, like, get you thinking if you don't know where to begin.
These are sort of universal prompts to get you started on your journey, right?
Yeah, or just start, like, thinking about those aspects of yourself, because sometimes it's hard to just come up with it on the spot. Like, I was literally trying to think of an example for me, and I still can't think of one right now, but stay tuned, because I might come up with one. But in the meantime, I have a couple questions for you. So what emotions do you avoid, and why? So why do you think you avoid those emotions, and what do you fear if you face them? And how do you deal with these emotions when you avoid them? So what are your coping mechanisms? Is it drugs, alcohol, anger outbursts, tantrums? It can be really like a list of things. I think everyone has their own individual way of masking it or shoving it to the side.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that one of mine is definitely discomfort, like one of the emotions that I avoid. And I'm trying to think. So
is it discomfort because of, like, the control aspect? Because, like, you feel like you're comfortable when you are in control?
Yeah, I think it's like an emotional, like it's a fear of losing control over my emotions, which would result in me doing something that I normally wouldn't, or self-sabotaging, or engaging in, like we said, drugs, alcohol, whatever those negative or those bad or those not so great coping mechanisms are.
So essentially, like, your biggest fear when you feel these triggers is that you're going to have an emotional outburst?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
That I'm going to be so uncomfortable that I'm going to act out in a way that is not in
accordance,
exactly.
with who you are, and with your values.
Yes.
Yeah, I got you. I guess for me, I think one of the emotions that I try to avoid the most is probably anger or confrontation, I suppose. I don't know if confrontation wouldn't be an emotion. I guess it is conflict.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm afraid of that is because, more or less, I think I'm afraid of being criticized, and I'm afraid of being yelled at, or I'm afraid of, like, anger.
Being lashed out at.
Yes, I think that's what my brain always goes to. And I think that even that, I project that in a lot of situations. Like, I always think that people are going to be mad at me. I mistake like regular interactions as conflict because of my hyper awareness or my projection of it, because I'm so afraid of it.
So I was going to say, how does that roll into one of our other prompts?
Oh, wait, I did want to... Okay, wait, how do you deal with the emotions, I guess?
How do you deal with conflict when it arises?
I avoid. And that's why I know, like, through doing therapy, like, exposure therapy is really good for me because I avoid a lot. I'm a very avoidant person. I didn't realize how much I do avoid.
That's how agoraphobia develops, you know.
Wait, is that the
Sheila
fear
from
throwing up?
Stainless? Yeah. No, well, it's the fear of... Or it's when you can't leave your house, which I think you were on the cusp of as a kid because you were scared of someone throwing up around you.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that I don't even know how that relates into like my inner, like, I guess my emotions that I feel the most, that my trigger. I wouldn't say these are my triggers, but these are the emotions that are frequently triggered in me is guilt and shame. I would say there's a lot of guilt and shame and just fear as well, but those three typically run me.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, obviously this is an ongoing process, so even us talking about it right now, you're probably making little breakthroughs, but it's like that is something that is years and years of learning that you are actively trying to combat and get to the bottom of, right? Because I mean, we're sitting down and we're discussing like little things, but truly, even my example, it all just goes so much deeper, and there's a lot more that you have to do individually on your own to correct those actions in the future.
Yeah, because it's not always just one discussion. Like, we've talked about the same things over and over again, and there's always like new conclusions, or you can really narrow it down. Like, the more that you talk about it, or the more that you don't have to talk about it. It's nice if you have someone that you can discuss these kind of things with, but you can do the work on your own.
Yeah, the more
but
you
it
write
takes
about
time
it,
of like uncovering new facets and really getting down to the bottom of it, which is, I guess, another question that rolls into this one is, what are you afraid of? That's a good way to kind of confront head on the things that are holding you back, to identify those limiting beliefs. So what is it? So I am afraid of confrontation. So you can just imagine how many ways situations that's impeding me, or like that belief is holding me back because I perceive confrontation as scary and something that I can't handle, because I'm afraid that either I'm going to stutter or I'm not going to be able to defend myself. I think that's what it is.
You're not going to come off the way you want to, essentially.
Well, not feeling heard, I guess, because we were talking about that with you, but I think that's the same with me, is that I'm not going to be understood. Maybe that is a big insecurity or thing that I project all the time, is that I'm perceiving that the person is not going to understand me. Therefore, I focus too much on trying to break down what I'm saying and then lose track of what I'm saying. That's like the CBT cognitive cycle that I end up in, like self-fulfilling prophecy. They're not going to understand me. Therefore, I end up fucking up my words. They don't understand me, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I feel like that is sort of maybe a common thought cycle for those who struggle with those who are neurodivergent, because I think that might be partially because of the ADHD. You have a hard time regurgitating what is in your
it's actually
brain,
like
right?
a symptom. I almost teared up. I seen like a list of it, and it was like disorganized thoughts, and like it's something that I'm so hyper aware of, and like I battle with it every single day, like, because I'm so cognitive of it, and I'm trying so hard to talk normal.
This podcast has a bunch of cuts. We're on part 7 now because we both kind of struggle with this, so this is definitely something I fully understand and can comprehend.
And it manifests differently, though, because let's even break it down, because you feeling unheard or misunderstood, like, do you find that you struggle and project that? Is that something that you feel like?
Yes, and it's to the extent that I just won't speak up in a lot of situations. Like, I just know in my head, or my core belief is that I'm not going to be able to get the point across anyway, so why even bother bringing it up?
I can't articulate. That could even go down to, if you want to break it down even further, because I did this in therapy, is like basically that I am inadequate, or I'm
have
stupid,
value, or
or even like or because that's essentially what my problem is that I'm insecure that people are going to perceive me as stupid because of the way that I articulate, and I think that a lot of that even comes from hearing or feeling insecure about the way that my dad articulates, and me not being able to understand him and thinking that that's the way that I come off to other people.
Okay, that's interesting. I don't think, listen, as someone who sees you struggle with this on a daily basis, I really think that you make more word-to-mouth connections than you realize, and sort of get
fucked up.
Yeah,
I forget. I think I forget what I'm saying. Like, I forget. I use so many words.
Because there's like a paralysis that starts to happen once you get into that.
Yeah, every time. And I don't know. Well, I'm working on overcoming that. And I think that's a combination of like physical, like I want like meditation and like focus training, and like feeding my brain the right foods and nutrients. Like I do think that there's things that I can do to help, because I know that my mental clarity goes up and down given the amount of pressure that I put on myself.
Circumstances. There's a lot of things that
energy
play into that.
If I was smoking.
If you're under the influence or not, for sure.
Okay, wait, this is something that I really wanted to bring up the whole podcast, because this one's really, this is a biggie. Okay. So what annoys you about other people, and can you see those aspects within yourself? A lot of people, surface level, don't want to admit it, but the more that you get into it, the more I think like self-aware you become, the more that you start seeing that a lot of those things that you are vocal about
in other people are projections of yourself.
You're deep rooted. Like, I think that really cuts deep, because that isn't surface level shadow work. That's like, oh, I'm admitting that this is something. No, I would never do that. Like, because that's the typical run-of-the-mill hypocrite. That's why they're blah, 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 and because they want validation.
Yeah, I think that projection is something that can be touchy to admit to, because it is
your perception of reality that you're feeding yourself to cope, for your ego to cope.
Yes, exactly. It's yourself feeding yourself bullshit, essentially.
To keep you in the same vibration. And that is a very egotistical mechanism to keep you where you're at. You need to break through that and see the clarity of, oh, well, this isn't serving me to even believe that. Or is this helpful to believe this? Or is it just comfortable? And that's another thing with your triggers, is what emotions are you most comfortable? What negative emotions are you most comfortable feeling?
Yeah.
Because those are the ones that you're going to live in, and those are the ones that run you. And that's where a lot of your shadow work really should start, because that is probably what's impeding you the most.
For sure. I think that for me, one of the sort of places that I lived in for a while was self-pity.
Yep.
And I masked it as depression. So if I don't do something, I can't fail at it, and I was feeling like I couldn't do anything, so I put myself in a position where I wasn't doing anything, and that's like the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, exactly. I can't, like, I have a quote in there, but it's going to take me 10 years to dig it out. Yeah. There's so many helpful things that I learned, like, through the therapy group, but, like, the self-fulfilling prophecy, like, I kind of learned that, like, through spirituality before doing the therapy, but it is, it's the very, like, tactile way of how manifesting works. Like, you are telling yourself, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, this is why I can't do it, I suck, honestly, no, I'll never be able to do it. It starts with, like, little, and then before you know it, you are all aboard fucking Pityville.
Yeah, and you're living that, and you will never do that thing because you've convinced yourself that you can't do it anyway.
And then you feel sorry for yourself because everyone around you is doing it. And that's another way to come familiar with your trigger, is what are you envious about? What are you mad about? Or what do you feel is unjust? How do you feel like you are being ripped off in life? Why?
For sure.
And then see where that comes from and why. And then that even ties back to your childhood, because that's another huge part of shadow work. Like, we talked about it before, but a lot of these come from childhood programming, specifically like what you did not get as a child. It kind of alters your lens of how you love
things.
Yes,
as an adult. Absolutely. If you're interested in doing any of these journal prompts yourself, we are actually posting them to our Instagram, so keep an eye out for that. We also hopefully will be uploading a PDF file that you guys can download and work on yourself. Without further ado, another journal prompt for us to work through.
Okay. I guess a good one would be, what do you judge others on?
That is a really good one. I think that ties back into like the whole projection thing in a way.
So it's something that you're hypersensitive to, probably for a number of reasons. Normally it's because it's tied into insecurity, and I'm trying to give an example of that.
I have one off the top of my head. I think that a lot of the times when I see people doing TikToks that I wouldn't do, like dancing ones or whatever, I'm like, oh my god, I can't believe that person's doing that. But that's obviously coming from a place where I'm insecure. I would never dance on camera.
Yes, exactly. And it's not so much that, oh my god, that person's so weird. It's that, oh, like,
they're doing something that I can't.
Yeah, that I can't do. Yeah.
Or think I can't.
Yes, exactly. Or that you're telling yourself that you can't do, so therefore that's just weird.
Yeah.
And I think that really even goes, oh my god, it's projection essentially is all you do in high school. I think that's what you live out of is your ego, and I feel like I think that's where like most of our like insecurity is stemmed from is
that adolescent age.
Yes, and other people projecting, and then growing up with the media as well. That's a whole other level of brainwashing. But I think that like when others start pointing out your insecurities.
I remember when I was like, even in grade school, I mean, kids would make fun of each other. Oh, look at her acne, and like, look at this and look at that. That's because we were, like, I was insecure when I got a pimple at 12 because what the heck is that? So obviously I'm going to make it fun of someone who's covered in them to deflect from what I'm going through.
Exactly. To point someone else's flaws out, so it's
self-preservation.
Yes, yeah. You're pointing out someone else's flaws so nobody's looking at yours.
Yes.
And that follows you up until adulthood, and it's kind of like your responsibility to start catching it. And I feel like even rapidly over the last year, like, there is a lot of programming that I think that deprogramming that goes on in your early 20s, like especially coming out of like high school and like that kind of mentality. They call it
discovering it yourself, kind of thing.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, and like rewriting your story.
Yeah, or redefining your core beliefs as well.
Yes, yeah, that is a really good way to put it. I kind of lost my train of thought.
Sorry, I'm interrupting.
Oh, no, I feel like you helped me out there, but projection, high school.
Reprogramming your core beliefs. We were talking about how this stuff is sort of, there's a magnifying glass on it in adolescence.
I feel like it's easier to catch as you get older. So I feel like even when I was like 19 and 20, like some of the things that I was doing and how like unnecessarily mean I was being, I don't think that truly defines who I am. And I feel like even if there's people out there that knew me when I was younger that listened to this podcast, like I'm sure I was miserable to be around at points. Like I know that I was, but now kind of owning up to myself and having the confidence in myself to stop judging other people, because I think that's where it comes from, is when you start owning yourself and loving yourself unconditionally, like you will have that love to give to other people, and you see other people being their authentic selves and being confident, putting themselves out there, and you're applauding them for just doing that. It's not...
They're not flaws anymore. They're just a different way of being.
Yeah, because when you accept yourself more, I think you start accepting others more as well. And I don't know. It's just, it's a learning and growing process for sure. And I think a lot of it takes place in like your late teens, early 20s, late 20s. And I really hope that all of you that were listening to this podcast got something from it.
Yes, for sure. I think it's also important to note that when it comes to like that deprogramming, a way that you can recognize it in others is gossip. I think that the more that you gossip, the more of an immaturity is shown, because that is
or like insecurity. Like the more you gossip, the more insecure you are, and I don't think that like it is pretty. It's so plain and simple now that you're older. That like once you start kind of like seeing the world in that light, that and it's not like that you're even like passing judgment. Like I feel like I get caught up in gossiping too.
Yes, definitely.
And it's
me too.
It's not even just insecurity. I think it's also like habit and like bandwagon mentality and
all those emotions that are comfortable to you.
Yes,
like maybe doing that in a social setting is comfortable because you have other people validating you, and that's why we tend to make a gossip a group setting, so that you can also agree with me that that's awful.
Yes, it's a validation loop. It's a validation loop. When you have a problem with something and you're insecure about it, the first thing you're going to do is run off and find that person that's going to validate you, and that's why a lot of the times, like, it's funny because you know what you need deep down and you have the tools to validate you, and you can even see it. Like, a good example is, like, say that you have a problem with something and person A doesn't agree with you. So you're going to go to person B. Person B doesn't agree with you. Person C doesn't agree with you, but person D does.
And that's the person that matters now.
Yes, exactly. Those three other people's opinions doesn't matter because they weren't aligning with yours, but for whatever reason, we crave that verbal validation or whatever, that physical validation from somebody else, even though all we're doing is internally looking for someone to agree with us.
Yes, exactly. And shadow work is definitely a process of learning how to do that on your own and learning to do it in a healthy way. Like, instead of gossiping to someone else about what so-and-so did, now you can reflect back on what so-and-so did and say, you know, why were they acting like that, and why does that bother me? And then you've done your shadow work.
Exactly. And that's like that's the best way to get through life without getting caught up in these shadows, essentially. You're avoiding getting pit stopped in these places where you don't want to be in, like ruminating in these unpleasant vibrations.
Yes, you'll never be able to move forward with your life if you don't address these little vortexes that you get yourself sucked into and work your way through them, essentially.
Because at the end of the day, you're the only person that is holding you back from having the life that you want, and it is just whatever beliefs you have surrounding whatever you desire that is blocking you from having it, and whatever stories that you tell yourself.
Yes, exactly. Your core beliefs and so on. Yeah, to keep yourself comfortable and sometimes ignorant to reality, unfortunately.
Yes, because growth is scary, and the ego doesn't like growth, and that's why it'll be telling you XYZ why you should stay in this state of mind, in this comfortable, familiar place, when in reality, the more that you practice this, the easier it is to see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a very far travel. It's just just an acceptance, validation, and letting go and moving on and actively working towards aligning yourself with who you want to be. Yeah. Well, that is a very big part of it, but that reminds me of a whole other series that I think we should dive into is talking about like core values, like on the other side of it, not just this
like
negative,
your higher self.
Yes, exactly. Like what your values are and how to become familiar with your values and how to live
practice
by them
out every day. Yeah, I think that would definitely be a good podcast topic for next time.
Yes.
But for now, hopefully we've kind of covered everything and given you guys more of an understanding and gotten you sort of on your way to self-discovery, shadow work, and your higher self.
One more thing I wanted to say too, I don't know, I kind of did say this throughout, but this process does not happen overnight, and do not be hard on yourself because you're still acting out of your ego or acting like your old self or in an undesirable way. Do not beat yourself up in the process. It's only going to make things harder. So be gentle with yourself.
Yes, practice a lot of self-compassion, and always, this is something that I try to do, approach yourself as you would approach someone else, because I would never talk the way I talk to myself to someone else.
Or even talk to yourself how you would a child.
Yes,
because that's normally what it is, your inner child like screaming out for help that it's not getting or it hasn't received as a child.
Needing that parenting.
Yes,
exactly.
reparenting. Okay, but on that note, it was a nice chat. If you guys haven't already, please follow us on Instagram and TikTok. We're either at The Eureka Effect or at The Eureka Effect Podcast.
Yes, and check us out on YouTube. Always leave us a comment because we love to hear from you. Until next time.
Bye, guys.